Hello, friends. Thanks for joining us for the first in a series of planned Boyden interviews focused on the tech board agenda. Our goal is to share insights on the important issues facing tech company boards today, highlight some approaches being taken to address challenges and seize opportunities, and for those of you aspiring to become board members yourselves, provide some food for thought. I'm Rick Wargo, the founding partner of Boyden's Seattle office, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Sue Barsamian, an accomplished technology industry operating executive, and today a widely sought after technology board member. During her career, Sue's held key sales and marketing leadership roles in both venture-backed as well as with one of the tech industry's cornerstones, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, where she most recently served as the chief sales and marketing officer of HPE Software before turning her attention to board work. She now sits on the board of 6 innovative technology companies. And Sue, welcome.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's great to be with you. I guess, it's maybe worth pointing out that one of the highlights of my 37-year operating career is at one point we worked together, which was really a pleasure. And as you said, I did my operating career was quite long. I did it for over 35 years. And I guess about 3 years ago, I made the decision to move into my next chapter. Sometimes I say I retired, and my husband likes to say, no, she's not at all retired. And that's true. Because I really spend almost full time on a portfolio of boards. And I made the decision when I decided to transition to board work, I made the decision to focus on domains, companies in domains where I had operating experience. And so for me, that resulted in a kind of 2 focus areas. One is enterprise software and SaaS, and the second is cybersecurity. And I wanted to focus on high growth companies to the degree possible. And that has worked out great for me in the portfolio. I also decided to do a mix of large and small because I had done that also in my operating career, as you pointed out. So I currently am on 3 public boards, Box, Five9, and NortonLifelock, which I joined when it was Symantec. And then on the private side, Gainsight, Exactly, and on Feudal Holdings.
Yeah, well, and as Sue pointed out, it's really a pleasure for me and sort of a trip back in time since we worked together in the mid 80s. And we were just chatting and laughing earlier that computers weren't made out of wood back then, but local area networks were actually bleeding edge. Nobody had heard of Wi-Fi at that point. And today, my grandkids are configuring their Wi-Fi networks so they can connect to the internet.
Yeah,
so
definitely revealing our age.
Yeah. Well, enough about us. Let's get down to business and chat a little bit about boards and your experiences. I guess the first top of mind question is, what are the top tech board agenda items that you're viewing in terms of the companies that you work with today? And, why are they the things that are of most interest to the board?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. And there are a couple things that really stand out. Sometimes people say number 1, number 2, and number 3 on the board agenda these days is ESG. And I would say no, that's true. And I would say number 2 is definitely digital transformation and innovation and everything that goes along with both of those. In fact, I just literally came off a call on ESG. And while the acronym is really short, the breadth of what ESG means for a company and for its shareholders in terms of their interest in it is changing rapidly, and it's really broad. Whether it's E and environmental, and what do you do about climate? What are you responsible for? Reporting, what level of commitments do you need to make about your carbon footprint, about your emissions, and what do you need to do in order to establish those baselines and then set goals? Social, equally huge these days. Everything about human capital and whether you have the right workforce today and will have it for tomorrow. And then, the whole topic of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and whether you are being transparent about that, making commitments to improve, which I would say 100% of companies are in the category of needing to make commitments to improve, and how you're approaching that. And then governance, which is also, big. We are increasingly seeing shareholders getting more active in requests for changes to a company's governance policies to usually make sure that it's more balanced towards shareholders, whether that's dual class shares for voting, whether that's making sure that you have an independent board chair, a whole host of requests that we see coming from shareholders in the governance category. And I think it also includes the composition and the effectiveness of the board itself. And we see boards taking that a lot more seriously. So, given that spectrum, probably not surprising that ESG is often, 1, 2, and 3. But digital transformation and innovation, and we can talk a little bit more about that, Rick, I would say is right up there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just reflecting as I think back on some of my board experience, 10 years ago, two of those things wouldn't even have been mentioned. The whole ESG movement and the need to be cognizant, aware, and active in terms of solutions there just wasn't on the table back then. And DE&I, same thing. I mean, it was in the shadows. And so today, the world is different for a lot of reasons, COVID being the main one, but also in terms of the priorities of the board. So, Sue, that was a great summary. Thanks so much for your oversight. Can I ask you, what do you think a board can do to ensure that a company stays relevant and transforms with or ahead of the market?
Yeah. I would say it is more important than ever and potentially harder than ever. And the reason I say that is, the rate of change has never been greater. And if you think about digital transformation being both an internal and an external exercise, right? How are you digitally transforming to support and enable a productive workforce? And then how are you digitally transforming to make sure that you have, what the customers want to buy, and you're delivering it in the way the customers want to buy it, which is changing dramatically. In the midst of disruptive forces, you look at what's happened on the inside, and enabling a productive workforce. Well, gosh, now that's work from home. It's work from anywhere. It's completely different to enable a productive workforce today than it was, honestly, 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And as I see my board companies, honestly, I'm humbled and amazed to look at how quickly they had to pivot to digitally supporting a work from home workforce. And I believe in most cases that has accelerated goodness. We've accelerated progress that would have taken 5 years, and we've done it in 2 years, which is good. But just to be clear, it's been a change. And then on the external side, I would say also COVID related, the acceleration of digital transformation has totally changed customer buying behaviors, the way they try, the way they buy, the way they deploy, the way they engage with you. The bar has completely changed. And companies have to not only evolve their products and the categories and the features that their products have, but they also have to evolve the engagement model. And, that is a never-ending and a much more rapidly moving process these days. And then, just the feature and the competitive landscape. What is the market doing to you? What will 5G disrupt you? Will AI disrupt you? Can you disrupt somebody else with AI? What does the metaverse mean? As a board, you have to make time for all of those conversations. And you have to make sure that those conversations include external perspectives, and external perspectives both from the market perspective, how are you doing versus the competitive landscape, but also, from the customer perspective, what is customer retention telling you? What is customer NPS telling you? Do they like you? Do they like how you're delivering and engaging with them? And so I think getting a healthy dose of third-party input, including customer input, of course, is really important to making sure that as a board, you're helping the company, because as a board, you're an enabler. You're not running the company. You're helping the company. You're helping the people who run the company, but you can make sure that you're encouraging those third-party views and strategic discussions that are necessary these days. Things that we used to focus on as a board once a year, we now have to revisit almost every quarter, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I can imagine why you consider this a full-time job. There's a lot you need to be in tune with in terms of being able to provide the corporate governance required in a board setting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, that's one of the reasons that I like it as a board member. I didn't really know what to expect. And whether as a board member, what I would be doing is drafting off my 37 years of operating experience and hopefully helping in whatever way I could. What I underestimated was how I would need to be a continuous learner to keep up. And that has been, for me, a pleasant surprise, because I really like that. But you bring a lot of experience to the table as a board member usually. But you need to have a commitment to keep up, and that takes a lot of time. But it's fun.
Yeah. Well, I can honestly say that as a user of NortonLifelock and of Box, as two of the companies that you're on the board of, I personally witnessed some of the changes that they've made to stay attuned to the evolving market and my needs. Kind of refreshing to see that happen and be done in a proactive way. Yeah. So kudos. Good
to know. I will pass that on, and I've got 4 other companies you should look at.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What advice could you give in terms of the board's role of building and harnessing a culture of innovation? It kind of goes back to what you've talked about, of making sure that you recruit the right people, get them in the right seats. What do you do from a board standpoint to help guide the innovation culture that needs to happen?
Well, I think it kind of goes to what we just talked about, and then it goes further, right? So, one of if I take a step back, one of the principles of leadership that I have always subscribed to is that the role of a leader is to help people face reality and then help them mobilize to make the necessary changes. And so kind of what we just talked about is in the category of innovation, step number 1 is, do you have a realistic perspective of where you are and then where you're going to need to go? And so that is, I think, job 1 for a board. And then job 2 is, is the board helping the company to mobilize for change? And what that means is, depending upon how big that gap is, there are real trade-offs to be made on how the company places bets and how the company makes investments. And so, and that usually comes down to some hard decisions in terms of the way you manage the P&L, right? What do we need to do to invest for growth? How much do we need to invest? And then what will that mean in terms of potential trade-offs for profitability? And, as a board, you need to have everyone, including the board, grounded in reality as step 1. And then step 2 is, you then can't, if reality says the company's behind and the company needs to invest to accelerate or invest to stay ahead, then you as a board can't continue to drive for an unrealistic trade-off between growth and profit and investment in the P&L. And so I find that the more everybody is grounded in the same reality, the easier those decisions are and those discussions are. And usually, board discussions about the annual operating plan are incredibly complicated when you haven't spent the time getting that alignment up front. And so I think it's the job of the board to really pay attention to both. And when the data says you need to invest, then you need to figure out how you can help the company place those bets and support an environment that places bets, takes some risks, does some experimentation, and therefore is agile. That's a cultural commitment that I think also goes right up to the board. And then these days, the war for talent is, it's unbelievable right now, right? COVID and the Great Resignation. And, if you are going to be innovative and you are going to place some bets, you have to have the right talent profile to do that. None of us have the luxury of, going crazy on comp for everybody in the company. And so you've got to take a step back. And I've had this conversation on almost all my corporate boards. You still have to be able to compete for top talent where it matters and where you absolutely have to. And sometimes what that means is you need to accelerate the way you're balancing the rest of the workforce, whether it's the labor location mix or what have you, so that you are getting a blend of locations and skills and roles where you don't have to pay up, whether it's in cash comp or equity comp, to the degree that you do for the right skill in particular locations for some of these other roles. And I would say in the last 18 to 24 months, making that pivot, has caught everybody a little bit flat-footed. As much as we thought we were doing it, we had to take a step back and do it even faster to make sure that we could keep the top talent and not go completely upside down in the overall compensation profile.
Sue, I knew from the mid 80s that you were a straight shooter and direct, and those are some really succinct and very direct guidance in terms of what should be done. So, Sue, one of the most interesting things I think you just said was talking about the need for the board to have a great flow of information to understand where the company is, how it's perceived, what it needs to do. And boards need to depend, obviously, on their management team for a great wealth of that information. But it's always helpful to triangulate on things and get a full picture. How do you see boards doing that today to make sure that they have a good understanding of where a company stands and what their challenges are and what they do need to do?
Yeah, it's really important. And in fact, I literally had this conversation yesterday with my newest board, with the chairman, because usually what happens, particularly when you come into these private, companies who are, maturing in size and scale. And one of the things you help to mold is the management system and the reporting framework. And that has a lot of benefits, right? It gives management transparency. It gives the board transparency. It also eliminates go fetch cycles, which if you leave a board meeting and, the list of requests from the board are a couple of pages long, it's a good indication that the management system and the reporting framework isn't delivering what needs to be delivered. And so, what's a really good exercise for the board to do before a company kind of gets too big is to really spend some time on, what is the right management system and reporting framework? So we're tracking the things that matter. We're doing that from a trend line perspective. So 3 years, if you have it, of historics, 1 year of forward-looking pro forma, so that you are comparing against external industry benchmarks If there is an external benchmark available for this particular metric, whether it's sales productivity, whether it's the cost of your workforce, whether it's the amount you spend on real estate, right? There are a lot of great benchmarks available out there for peer companies. It all has to be relevant to the size company you are and the type of company you are. But if you do a little work, there's a gold mine of information out there. And that, again, it takes the noise out of the system. You have the data on how you're performing and how your performance is trending. You understand, if it's available, how your performance compares to industry best in class, and you make a decision as a board and as a management team on whether this is the time for you to be best in class, or whether you want to be best in class in 3 years. And, it takes some time to both put those frameworks together and have those conversations, but it saves time and churn in spades when you get everybody aligned.
Yeah. Let me switch gears for a second and talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Curious about what role you think boards should play in fostering that. And, frankly, I know that you have lived through all of this yourself over your career and had some personal experiences. So any insights you can share from that perspective would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, very deep on this topic, as you can imagine. It's important to everybody. And, I look at this category and honestly, the way I've personally experienced this topic as a combination of, look, this is one of those things that everybody knows it's the right thing to do, right? There's little doubt about that. And then the $1 million question is, okay, is knowing it's the right thing to do enough to make progress, or do you need some external pressure, right? Some policies, some regulations in order to help make sure you do the right thing that you already know is the right thing to do. And, and I subscribe to the notion that some external pressure is helpful because it just, in the midst of a lot of things pulling companies and management teams in many different directions on a day-to-day basis, it pushes it up in the priority list. People ask me all the time about my personal experience with, diversity in my career. And I actually benefited. I was an electrical engineering graduate in the early 80s. And in the early 80s, there were EEO, equal employment opportunity guidelines and regulations for companies. So companies had to hire a workforce that mirrored the community they lived in, they operated in. And I benefited from that, because if you were hiring engineering grads, you needed to have a certain percentage of females and minorities, and there weren't that many of us. So, I saw firsthand, and I think I was good, but I also got the attention because people were required to give it the attention. And I think that in the category of DE&I, we're experiencing the same thing. And interestingly enough, it started at the board level. California in 2018 was the first state to put a regulation in place that mandated for public companies headquartered in California that you had some gender diversity on your board. And it was a sliding scale based on the size of the board, and you had a couple of years to do it. They then came back in 2021 and they added underrepresented minority guidelines to that. Several other states have followed suit with either hard recommendations or just recommendations. But you've seen NASDAQ, Adina Friedman, the CEO of NASDAQ, got through in 2021 requirements for all listed companies on NASDAQ for diversity in their boards. You see investors like BlackRock, State Street, you see bankers like Goldman Sachs all putting requirements on boards for diversity. Goldman Sachs won't take you public if you don't have some diversity on your board. BlackRock and State Street will do a no vote at the proxy for the nom-gov chair if there's not diversity on the board. And those things have actually moved the needle. The stats in California since the 2018 regulation has been huge in terms of the progress. And, the naysayers who believed that it would significantly dilute the quality of the boards, that has not come to fruition. The boards are diverse and I think are better for it. And now we're seeing with ESG, we're seeing the same environment coming down to the company level. And that is not necessarily regulations like we had in the early 80s around EEO, but step one, which is just transparency and reporting. So, as part of ESG reporting, there is an EEO1 form, for example, which asks you to report on all of the diversity metrics associated with your workforce. And it looks at not only things like mix, but it looks at gender pay equality and all sorts of things. And so I think that external pressure for transparency in reporting is a really good factor in getting, management teams who know this is the right thing to do, maybe a little boost in actually getting it done.
Yeah. Well, if there's anybody that's living proof that it's a good thing to do, you certainly are. And I know you spent a lot of time mentoring others in the industry and helping to foster this movement. So when you mentioned earlier the aspect of bringing new board members onto a board, are there specific things that, from your perspective, you think boards should look for beyond diversity in terms of board member skill sets that are helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. We see a couple of things, and I'll tie it back to the digital transformation topic because of the importance of, making sure that not only you're evolving your product portfolio, but you're evolving kind of the internal fabric of the company. And as part of that, a really, really important category is cybersecurity, right? Are you investing in the right technology to keep the company safe, to keep your customers' privileged information safe, and that threat landscape, whether it's ransomware or phishing and, behavioral impersonations and fraud that goes along with that, or something like Log4j, which, everybody just got hit with. It's really important for boards to stay on top of this digital transformation and cybersecurity category. And it's really hard to do that if you don't have people on the board who are skilled and knowledgeable themselves. And so I've seen on, the boards that I'm on, not only, wanting to get tech executives, which is kind of it goes without saying if it's a tech company, but you see tech executives in demand in manufacturing companies and consumer packaged goods companies, right? Because just that tech experience is so important. And then we just put one of the most experienced chief information security officers in the industry on the NortonLifelock board. And she has completely transformed the way we run our reviews for both technology and cyber. And so, kind of living firsthand the benefits you see when you get some of that expertise on the board, and now starting to have that conversation on almost all my other boards.
Got it. Makes total sense. I'll ask this question, and I think maybe the answer is ditto. But are you seeing the same requirements in terms of the right CEOs coming into CEO roles in terms of that digital awareness and cybersecurity focus?
Yeah, the CEO role is it's really interesting the way it's evolving. It's got to be one of the hardest jobs in the world, if not the hardest job in the world. And I think keeping up with everything that you need to keep up with these days as a CEO is almost impossible. It must be impossible. And so, there's two things that I look for and I think boards are looking for in CEOs, along with kind of, domain experience, both in the categories that you're trying to drive, but also in scaling companies. But then, the skills around, are you a continuous learner, critical, right? Because the half-life of your past experience is really steep, meaning you very quickly these days become irrelevant if you don't keep up. And so you need not only a board, we talked about, the board, you have to be a continuous learner as a board member in spades as a CEO, right? You have to be a continuous learner, because the reason you got hired and the experience that you brought to the table isn't necessarily going to set you up for some of these unforeseen, curveballs in the future. And so continuous learning and the ability to build a team around you that complements your skills, right? You're not going to be an expert in everything, and that's okay. But it's fatal if you have gaps and you can't build a team around you that sufficiently plugs those gaps. And so, can you build and lead the right team, the right people in the right role at the right time? And especially for companies that are in these hyper growth phases, and maybe if it's a founder CEO, are you willing to make the shift when the person that may have been right from 0 to 100 million and maybe a fabulous person isn't necessarily the person that's going to get you from 100 to 500, and making those trade-offs of, right person, right skills, right role, right time, is I think fundamental in a CEO these days.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think I probably, as a recruiter, I think about it in terms of the comment you made about being a continuous learner. So many times we focus on what are the accomplishments, what are the achievements, what's the experience, but the personal characteristics and competencies of being a lifelong learner and your approach to things can be as important, if not more, than having some specific prior experience, because things change so quickly. You need to morph and you need to adapt. And so we've made some of our listeners who are, I hope, tuned in to find out, what do I need to do to get on a tech board? Wait long enough. I guess, you've been very successful doing that. Are there any pearls of wisdom you can share that are the right things to do to position yourself to ascend into a board role?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, boards are made up of people, and people pull, good people pull good people onto boards, just like in all other aspects of life. And firms like Boyden, right? So, the thing you want to do in your operating career, whether you're benefiting your next step as an operator or your potential tenure as a board director, is, kick butt in your current role, exceed expectations, and thereby build a network around you of people who are impressed with what you deliver and how you deliver it. And I would say that's job one. Job two is, it's very difficult to jump from being an operator to being a board member if you've never kind of sat at the C-suite table and been part of discussions with the board. And having been in large companies and small companies and seeing, I'll use HP as an example, even at the second level of management where the jobs are massive and you'll have 5,000, 10,000 people in an organization reporting to that second level of management. You're not at the C-suite table, and the conversations are different. And the conversations at the C-suite table are the conversations that kind of go to the board. And so in your career, getting large company experience is fabulous. And if you aren't in the position at the large company of being in the C-suite, then go to a mid-sized company where you are, because I do think it's a precursor to being ready to be a board member, that you understand the type of conversations that happen around that table, and then I think you're going to be quite well set up.
Fantastic. Sue, thank you so much. From beginning to end, it's been very informative, great information, great advice, great insights. It's great to see you as an old friend again. And
likewise.
And Sue, in the spirit of COVID, how about a virtual high five?
Yeah. Or
Thank
this.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Rick.